All right, we are recording. I'm Brandon Polite, Associate Professor of Philosophy at Knox College in Galesburg, Illinois. And I'm joined today by my friend Ley Cray, who is Director of LGBTQIA plus programming for Charlie Health. And she is also the co-founder and director of the Mind Body Ecology Institute. And also, in addition, she is a philosopher practitioner in private practice. So Ley, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me. It's good to see you, my friend.
Yeah, welcome back to the series. You have the record for most appearances so far, so let's keep that up.
Keep that record.
Okay, so I'm talking to you today as part of a mini series I'm doing on Taylor Swift re-recording her back catalog and basically attempting to reproduce the albums as faithfully as she can, with maybe some minor improvements in the vocal quality. And I'm talking to you because you have this awesome paper in the Journal of Aesthetics and Art Criticism on transparent and opaque performance personas. And we're going to get to sort of the Taylor Swift singing like herself to some degree as a younger person. But could you just talk about maybe the backstory that sort of led you to writing this paper, because I know you're a performer and this relates to.
Cool. Yeah, I'm so excited to talk about this paper. I reread it last night. And I'm not really in the habit of rereading my work. Some people find that deeply aversive. I'm one of those people, but I reread it and I was like, oh yeah, I said some things in here. But so this paper, I think it came out in like, what was it, 2019? Yeah, but of course I wrote it a while before that. And really, like, a lot of my papers, it was just kind of like I was writing it because I needed therapy. I was writing it because I was like hung up on a personal issue. And since, my mind is warped to think of everything in terms of philosophy, I process all my personal issues through like an analytic idiom. And I was like, I need to write a paper in order to resolve my personal issue. And this issue had to do with my music performances. So some of you might know I have a band. It turns 15 this year. And I was asked to describe the band the other day. And the best phrase I could come up with was like this like satanic folksy reprobate punk. And, I used to play a lot of shows back when I was in grad school. And before I started playing shows, I made a MySpace because that's what you do at the time. And I wanted people to think I was a real band because I hadn't accepted the validity of the one-person band yet. So what I did was I took photos of myself in all these different hats and I invented a band. And there was like the front person, and then there was the washboard player and the jug player. And then I got an invitation to play my first live show. So I had to come up with this elaborate backstory about how like why the other two members weren't present. One was in a coma, it turned out. One was in prison. Like, elaborate story. I had like drunk people coming up to me after shows and be like, I remember I saw you open for Gigi Allen when you had your jug player. I was like, cool, buddy. I'm sure you do. But it was this very sort of like rough, gruff, talking in a gravelly voice, drinking whiskey, hobo kind of thing, which was pretty deeply like affected. Like it wasn't real. But I played this festival in rural Ohio a couple times over, and they thought it was real because it was the only version of me they ever saw. I'd show up my overalls, my hat, and like corncob pipe, and I don't know why I had a corncob pipe. Apparently, I'm a snowman too. But I remember at one point, one of them at the festival found out that I had a PhD in philosophy. And I got treated different after that because they were like, oh, you're faking it. Oh, you're making fun of us. Right? Because like this was like a festival in like way rural Ohio, and I felt really weird about that. And I was like, am I appropriating a particular like stereotype into my performance? and then performing inauthentically at that as that, and then in certain contexts passing it off as authentic. And I started thinking about like the ethical issues there, and also what it said about the authenticity of my music. So this got me thinking about transparent and opaque performance personas. So this whole paper was basically, philosophical, therapeutic self-intervention to try to figure out whether I was doing anything wrong in presenting myself in those ways at those shows. And my ultimate answer is yes, in fact, I was. So I ended up sort of reconfiguring the band afterwards. And that's the story of why I wrote this paper. I also wrote it because, I was reading a lot of stuff on philosophy of song, and I was teaching it too. And I taught Jeanette Bicknell's great paper on performance personas. And I was just like, this is so cool. This is so great. I think I have something to say to push it a little bit further, not to argue, because I think she's right, but to kind of, extend. It was more of an ampliative paper than a critical paper, is one way that I like to think about it. So yeah, that's a little bit of the backstory.
Okay, awesome. So you mentioned one distinction that's really important to the paper and to the discussion of personas in song, and that's the transparent, opaque distinction. And so could you talk about that a bit?
Absolutely. It's so important. I put it in the title, right? So, okay, let's have a starting point. Let's introduce the notion of a performance persona, which is something that, I did not invent, right? Bicknell talks about this. Ted Gracyk talks about this. Lots of other folks talk about this. But a performance persona would be sort of the public face that a performer of any kind puts on in the context of their performances. And by puts on, I don't mean like they actually put on a costume, though in some situations they do. We'll talk about those. But basically, we can think of it as a curated, consciously or otherwise, set of mannerisms, of facts about you, of little details that are made public. And your performance persona is not just your stage presence, but it's your social media presence. It's what you say in interviews. It's what you let slip in your songs or what you intentionally include in your songs. It's sort of like this, it's what the fan would be able to construct about your personality. These are inevitable. If you're performing, you've got a performance persona, right? It's not something that necessarily is cultivated, but insofar as it is either a subset of facts about you or a bunch of fabricated facts, or maybe a bit of both, right? And it's never like a full, complete description of you as a human being. That would be too long. There's always some persona in play. Persona, as I argue in the paper, I forget if I argue, but I assert in the paper, we can divide them up roughly into two kinds, at least along this axis. There's transparent ones and there's opaque ones. So let's look at examples. We've talked about Gwar on here before, right? Yeah, Gwar. Great band in some senses. So when we look at the late front person of Gwar, Oderus Urungus, an alien demon from the planet Scumdogia, who is like some number of billion years old. And this is the persona through which Gwar songs, at least of that era, the Brockie era, because there is a post-Brockie era, are presented and performed. Right? When you hear the voice of Oderus Urungus, you're hearing the voice of a demon from the planet Scumdogia. But you're not hearing the voice of David Brockie, right? So when you're listening to Gwar, and I don't know, there's a lyric about being from the planet Scumdogia, you're not going to be like, this is so inauthentic because Dave Brockie is from Toronto. He's lying to us. It's like, no, he's not. He's performing under this persona. And in the paper, I call that an opaque persona because the idea is that like you're not supposed to be able to see through the persona to the performer, right? It's sort of like what you know, you're not entitled or invited to infer things about the performer from the persona. And finding out that there's a mismatch isn't really a compromise to authenticity. So that's an opaque persona. What about a transparent persona? These are maybe a lot more common, right? So think about someone like, say, Ani DiFranco. So Ani DiFranco gets up there and performs as Ani DiFranco. The persona's politics, you are entitled from the context and you are invited to infer that they are Ani DiFranco's politics, right? If you met Ani DiFranco off stage, you would expect congruence with Ani DiFranco on stage. Whereas if you meet Dave Brockie, who performs as Oderus Urungus, you don't necessarily expect total congruence, right? Maybe a little bit. But you would not be surprised when he's like, I'm actually from Toronto, right? Or I'm actually not a demon. I'm actually not like 9 feet tall. So with the transparent personas, like we might see with Ani DiFranco, Kurt Cobain, Kendrick Lamar, you know, we could just arbitrarily name more musicians. The idea is that you can see through the persona. Okay? Or at least you are invited and entitled to act as if you can see through the persona to the performer, and vice versa. That vice versa. When you learn a fact about Ani DiFranco, that then enriches your understanding of the persona. Contrast that with an opaque persona. When you learn a fact about Dave Brockie, that doesn't tell you much about Oderus Urungus. Right? If you learn that Dave Brockie's favorite food was broccoli, that doesn't tell you that Oderus Urungus's favorite food was broccoli. Right? So yeah, does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool.
Yeah, good. And so I mean, there's one other just important distinction you make in there, which is between a performance persona and a song persona, right? Yeah. And I mean, basically, the performance persona is, you know, what you adopt when you perform live, roughly, or when you perform on an album, whereas a song persona is one that sort of appears in a particular song, right? That if you're sort of adopting for the sake of this song a perspective other than your own, and so like Stone Temple Pilots sex type thing, right, is Scott Weiland singing from the perspective of a sexual predator, wow. Right? And so there's sort of it's not meant to be transparent, right? That character that he's singing as on that song isn't meant to be reflective necessarily of him, although, you know, maybe it could be criticized as such or something.
Yeah, and that's a cool point that maybe we'll loop back to. Yeah. But in a song like that, yeah, the song persona, I think of like performance personas are the suit that you wear when you're on stage, and song personas are hats that you wear for maybe a song or 2 songs or a stretch of the set, but then you can swap them off. And yeah, with the Scott Weiland case, that particular song persona that's adopted, once we realize it's a song persona and not a transparent performance persona, we realize like that's an exploration of a theme, not a confession. Another example would be like Johnny Cash, right? So Johnny Cash has a very strong persona. My understanding of his history and everything is that we're invited to take this to be a transparent persona. But, you know, there's a difference between when he performs Man in Black and when he performs A Boy Named Sue. Because when he performs A Boy Named Sue, he's not like throwing this revelation at the crowd, like, actually, my dad named me Sue, not John. It's like, no, like he's putting on a hat. So what we get is these layered personas where like, this can get really complicated, right? Where like you can be performing under an opaque persona, a transparent persona, whatever. And then also put a song persona on top of the performance persona, and they can be incongruent in interesting ways. Like you can have a transparent performance persona and an opaque song persona on top of it, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, so let's talk about a complicated case of that sort, and in particular, David Bowie, right? Who's on my t-shirt, who's on my mug, right? And David Bowie is an amazing case to think about here because, you know, his name's David Jones. And so just the history of this is really funny, right? That initially he's going to record under the name Davy Jones, then the Monkees get big and he can't. So he changes his name to Tom Jones. Then Tom Jones gets big and he can't, right? So then he switches it to David Bowie and the rest is history. But you know, so a song like Space Oddity, for example, right? His sort of breakthrough hit, right? He's a struggling artist. He's releasing some stuff. He records that when he's sort of basically in like his hippie flower child phase. And it gets really big. And then, you know, he then shifts to Ziggy Stardust, right? And he still performs the song, but that song's really interesting because there's two perspectives in it, right? You have Major Tom, who gets lost in space, maybe, either intentionally or not, depending on how you read it. And then you have Ground Control, right? And David Bowie's singing from both perspectives there. So can we talk about a case like that? But the further wrinkle then is when he performs it as Ziggy Stardust, right? Which was not the original persona he recorded it under.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I love and appreciate about Bowie is Bowie was really innovative insofar as he made this persona work, and the sort of the fluency and the fluidity of personas kind of into its own art form, right? And I think that's one thing that ends up being pretty rich about attending to these different kinds of personas, whether it be transparent, opaque, song, performance. You can start to see an artist's skill with manipulating personas as an aesthetic achievement in and of itself. And I think that's something that Bowie is to be celebrated for. Quick note too, I used to bag Davy Jones's groceries when I was a teenager. And I'll tell you, I got stories. I will not share them here, but off the record someday.
We'll talk later.
Yeah, I got stories about Davy Jones. Yeah, so with Bowie, we've got stacked personas, right? Because I think a lot of folks, so the case is we've got David Jones performing as David Bowie, who's performing as Ziggy Stardust, who is, during a particular part of the set, performing in a sense simultaneously, but technically not, as both Major Tom and Ground Control. That's beautiful, isn't it? Just like people think of musical achievement as like moving your fingers fast or something, but like this is a very interesting musical achievement that Bowie pulled off here. This stacking of personas in a way that doesn't trip up the audience, that doesn't leave them confused about what's going on. That's really cool. The Bowie persona is an interesting one. And I mean like the base David Bowie, like meta persona, because it's not clear whether it's transparent or opaque. Because it's kind of like they influenced one another. It's kind of like Bowie's actual real self, my understanding was kind of shifted by his performance personas. So even if it started out opaque, like they kind of merged. I'm not a Bowie scholar, but this is my like lay person understanding. So he's a really cool case in that respect too. But so he's performing, let's say, under the Ziggy Stardust performance persona, right? Which is an opaque persona because no one is like, okay, this is actually a guy from Mars, because we don't have those. So already people are going in, suspending some disbelief. There's an element of fiction to this performance. And then when we see Ziggy put on the Major Tom hat and the Ground Control hat, so it's interesting when we think about that song, whether that is one persona or two, whether it's like one in two parts or whether it's two. I don't think that really matters, but someone could write a paper on it and like get tenure or something. But I'd want to point out that they'd be very different, like the reception of that, the like aesthetic reception of that song, of Bowie performing Space Oddity as Ziggy Stardust versus Bowie performing Space Oddity as, you know, the early Flower Child Bowie, versus Bowie performing Space Oddity under that weird thing he did in the 90s where he got hooked up with Trent Reznor and tried to be this like industrial, you know, like outside era.
Yeah, when he's got the orange goatee.
Yeah. So really when we like aesthetically engage with the performance, you know, the persona is going to be a part of that aesthetic engagement kind of invariably, in different ways depending on the kind of persona. But the aesthetic result of these different stackings is going to be different, right? Because you've got costuming, you've got movement, you've got the context in the rest of the set, right? Because the aesthetic features of a song and a live performance, you know, we can pull them out, pull out a particular track and just evaluate it on its own. But like a more rich engagement would be like seeing its aesthetic properties as, in a sense, influenced by the songs that come before and the songs that come after. Seeing it as not as a performance, but a part of a performance, like a longer temporal event. So I don't know if I'm answering your question. I'm rambling about a lot of things. So bring me back in, Brandon.
No, that's totally fine. So maybe we should shift now to talk about Taylor Swift, if that's cool with you.
Let's do it.
Let's do it, right? And so what she's doing is, you know, her former record label gets sold, right, to a company owned by Scooter Braun, who is Kanye West's manager, who she obviously has negative history with. And so what she does is she decides to re-record her back catalog, right? The 6 albums that she released under Big Machine Records, her original label. And her goal is to reproduce them pretty faithfully. She wants to, I think, slightly improve the vocal quality, but musically it sounds nearly identical. And so you have a woman in her early 30s recording an album again that she recorded as a teenager, right? Like 16, 17-ish, with Fearless in particular. I mean, she's going to do her first album, which she did when she was like 16 or something, right? And roughly singing in that style. And so I think that, you know, there are a couple ways to go at this. One is just to think of sort of how an artist's relationship with their songs change over time, right? That some of those songs she's sung, performed live countless times, and, you know, she's changed with them over time, but now she's sort of going back in time and reappropriating her aesthetic from when she was a teenager. And so, I mean, I think there are 2 ways to think about it. One is the case where she's slightly altering the vocal quality, right, to improve it. The other is to think of, well, what if she just straightforwardly mimicked herself in the way that Joe Perry of Def Leppard does in 2012 when they re-record Pour Some Sugar on Me, right? Where he literally learned to sing like he did when he was in his 20s, right? When he's in his 50s, I guess, right? He had to relearn how to sing to pitch himself up, right? Since his voice lowered over time. So let's think about those 2 cases, right? The one where she's slightly improving the vocals, the other one she's literally just trying to mimic herself. And sort of re-embody who she was as a teenager, right? So could you talk through maybe those 2 cases?
Yeah, so this is a really cool case that kind of like pushes against the limits of the project as conceived in the paper in cool ways. Because like it got me thinking again about some issues in the ontology, like the meta ontology of music, because the performance persona stuff is pretty clearly circumscribed so that it's only about live performances, right? And it's not, you know, the project doesn't, as written, extend to recorded works, but that doesn't mean it can't. It just means I didn't think about it in the paper. So this is a cool opportunity to do that. Now, the reason I talk about the meta-ontology stuff, I mean, maybe this is meta-ontology, maybe it's not, I don't know. But some people will say that look, there is no performance persona in either of these Taylor Swift songs when we're talking about the recordings, because there's no performance, right? Because it's not like Taylor set up in a studio with her band and played through the whole. I mean, these tracks are edited, assembled, constructed in post-production, much like a film is edited together, right? It's not like we're just watching a fixed cam recording of a theatrical production that's done live. But then, when we think about recording based music, this like tradition that Ted Gracyk would call like the tradition of rock, which I think Taylor Swift is a part of, there is a performance. It is the performance that generates the product of this track, right? Like I think Stephen Davies talks about performance in this way, right? And there is interesting like ways of thinking about personas there. And they're like the personas in play in these two tracks, and like, what's it called? Love Story? Sorry, that I feel really I
It's
should
okay.
know that. I
It's
should know
okay.
that.
No, it's okay.
I feel really performative being like, what's it called? But like I listen to death metal. But when we listen to Love Story and then Love Story Taylor's version, which I did as I was walking my dogs this morning, I did my homework. You hear the one, and like what we know about Taylor in that first one is that she's how old?
Like 16, 17.
Okay, yeah. So she's a youngster. She's a teenager. Maybe doesn't have that much insight into relationships and how they tend to go, into the nature of romance, into the true meaning of Romeo and Juliet, and
exactly
going against romance. It's like, don't do this, it's bad. Right? It was before we started romanticizing romance. And then you listen to Taylor's version, and that name is significant because there's like more ownership there, and it's like, this is the real version, this is my version, rather than that version that is someone else's. Maybe that only refers to the legal aspect of it, but it does seem to have aesthetic import. Gerald Levinson talks about titles and how they aesthetically impact the work, right? But you listen to it and it's different. It's like, oh, you're a 30-year-old woman and you're singing like this. I feel kind of bad for you. Like, you need to read more scholarship on Romeo and Juliet. Like, you took the wrong message from that, and you sound kind of green. Like, I mean, no offense, some people don't date until they're later in life, but it's like, But I get she's not singing. To be fair, she's not singing in this re-recorded version under her 30-year-old persona. She's adopting a persona that is herself, but a younger version of herself. It's like a time machine persona or a time capsule persona. And this happens live all the time. This happens like with every live performance of every song that is not improvisational. Right? What's the Mitch Hedberg joke? I don't know it exactly, but he's like, basically the punchline is like, someone talked about a photo from when they were younger, and he's like,
all photos of you are from when you were younger.
Yeah. So I think this is why I can't listen to Nine Inch Nails, because like, you look at early 90s Trent Reznor, and dude was mad. Like his grandma just died, like he was strung out, he was going through record label like terrible situations. His dog had just died after jumping out of a window. Like he was not in good shape. Not to romanticize that or anything, but like it lent a certain atmosphere to the songs where when you listen to them, you're like, yeah, this guy's going through some stuff. But now you listen to like Trent Reznor perform like Wish now, and you're like, oh, dude, you need a therapist. Like this is some unresolved stuff. This is not in the moment stuff. This is unresolved, or this is just really inauthentic. I can, we have this expectation. Audiences go to see musicians play, and you want to hear your like favorite songs and everything. But when you really think about it, you're like, they're not feeling that, right? So if you really want to buy into the experience of the performance, you've got to hear it as them almost adopting an opaque version of their past self as a persona, or more precisely, a version of their past self as an opaque persona, right? I think this is what we have to think that Taylor's doing, recording these under an opaque version. Like, otherwise it's just kind of like the aesthetic properties, just the meanings of the songs, the inferences we make about Taylor Swift or that we're invited to make, they're just off, misleading, right? So I think principle of charity might dictate, like, when we think about, Love Story, Taylor's version, is it a better aesthetic object, all things considered, if we think of it as being done under an opaque performance persona, or at least an opaque song persona, than it is when we think of it under transparent? I think the answer is yes. And that's some good reason to go that way. Barring like some sort of official declaration from the artist. And maybe she has clarified. I don't read a lot of Taylor Swift interviews. Does this sound plausible? What do you think about this?
No, I think that's absolutely plausible. I think that has to be right, because otherwise, yeah, it is sort of sad that a 30-year-old woman would be singing from her current perspective about, looking for her Romeo, when presumably she's learned enough since then that that's not an ideal that anyone should be striving toward. They both end up dead.
Yeah. And there's what's the one lyric in the song where she's like, I'm gonna butcher this because like I've heard these songs like intentionally a total of one time each. And that's not a flex. It's an embarrassment. Like, I'm so lonely and like waiting for you to like save me. Like, that's some really unhealthy thinking about relationships. Like, when I'm working with adolescents through their existential struggles in clinical adjacent work that I do now, like, if they said something like that, that would be a concern. Waiting for someone to save me, like, honey, no matter who you are, that's a red flag in the way you're approaching relationships. And also when it comes to like your own like personal assessment of your value and your agency. But it's kind of congruent with this like teenage persona. It's really incongruent with a 30-year-old persona. At least assuming like, typical or like normative emotional development. Yeah,
right. That she's now a multi-millionaire many times over. She's seems to be in a stable, loving relationship, and so presumably the song isn't expressive of who she is now. It's expressive of who she was then. And so when she sings it now, and when she records it now, and that recording, take after take after take is stitched together and pro tooled and auto tuned, right? This is sort of her. She has to be adopting the persona that she had when she originally recorded it, right? And that's going to be true both in the re-recordings, but also when she performs a song live now, right? That's just not true of her anymore, in the way that the shit Trent Reznor was dealing with in the early mid 90s just probably and hopefully isn't true of him now, right? And so it has to be.
He's like happy, he's all buff and vegan and rich. It's like, okay.
Yeah, multiple Academy Awards. Yeah, feeds the ego, makes you feel better.
And there is an ethical element to all of this too, right? So like, there is kind of this norm of performance that I talk about in the paper, where if you're using an opaque persona, you need to signal that to the audience in some way. Because if you try to pass off an opaque persona, or what would most plausibly maybe rightfully be thought of as an opaque persona, as if it were transparent, that's kind of an analysis of what it is to be a poser, right? And that's misleading your audience, right? It'd be like, you know, if Ani DiFranco were to get on stage and be like, I love feminism, I'm Ani DiFranco, and then go vote for Donald Trump, right? Like this would be, it'd be like, oh, you're passing off an opaque persona as if it were transparent. That's a bummer, and that is both like aesthetically weird and ethically weird. So I think if does Taylor Swift, like there is signaling here because there is this high profile announcement and acknowledgement and press around the fact that she is re-recording these songs for these reasons. Right. So that's enough to tip off the astute listener or even the casual listener that these are opaque personas.
Right? Yeah, right. And so when the song shows up on a movie soundtrack, it's going to say Taylor Swift, Taylor's version 2019, 2020, whatever. Yeah.
But that title is so interesting to me because that title is one of the clues that what you're hearing in that version is performed and recorded under this opaque persona. But also it's the bit of evidence is saying like, this is my version. And there's just this weird incongruence there, right? Where it's this personal ownership, my version, but I'm not singing as myself.
Yeah,
that's aesthetically interesting.
That's very interesting.
Right. And you know, I don't want to make mountains out of molehills because again, it might just be this is the version that I own.
Yeah.
But you know, the point stands, I think. Yeah, that's my like stomp the foot, pound the table moment where it's like, no, it's interesting enough. The copyright thing does not diffuse that.
Yeah, no, I think that's really interesting. So I think we'll leave it on that note. So Lee, thank you so much for talking to me. I absolutely love talking to you.
Likewise, my friend. This is so fun. And thanks for getting me to think about Taylor Swift.
You're welcome.